Happy summer. Rob Stone from Fox Sports here, and welcome to Big Noon Kickoff, the offseason. Has anything happened this college football offseason? Yeah, a lot has happened, and we have a lot to get to. We're going to break down the SEC. Is Alabama the team to beat again in the conference? We're also going to talk the top 5 defensive players in college football. Matt Leinart, Bob Stoops, Joel Klatt are going to join me momentarily, but we're going to begin with the huge news involving the Big 12 and the SEC, and Bruce Feldman's going to join us in just a second on that. Of course, Monday, Texas and Oklahoma, they released this joint statement saying they will not renew their Big 12 media rights in the year 2025. The next day, they notify the SEC that they are seeking an invitation for membership in the year 2025. So much to break down on this, how it impacts both conferences and college football as a whole. Our insider, Bruce Feldman, joins us right now. And Bruce, what should the remaining, if you will, Big 12 programs be doing right now?
Rob, it's chaotic right now. At this point, this story has gotten so much momentum really in the last week, and it just keeps getting juicier and juicier and a little more salacious. Just at midweek on Wednesday, you had Bob Bowlesby, the commissioner of the Big 12, really fire a big shot at one of their TV partners, ESPN, basically accusing them of tortious interference, says he has irrefutable evidence. And where this goes to is the leftovers, the other teams that are in this conference, the Oklahoma States, the Texas Techs, the Baylors, the TCU, what their next move was going to be. And so what we're told, my sources have said that the conference that has been aligned with ESPN to try to basically dissolve the Big 12, and we'll get into this in a second, is the AAC. Because what that next move was going to look like for the leftovers of the Big 12 with Texas and OU, those are the big ticket items, especially as it relates to the TV market share. They had showed interest in the Pac-12. They're trying to figure out what their next move is. They're all scrambling. And so now you have this element with Bob Bowlesby, the Big 12, and really pointing up the finger at ESPN. It's getting really, really messy, and the lawyers are all over it.
And just for full disclosure, Fox is a partner with the Big 12 as well. What do you think the working relationship is going to be between the commissioner and Texas and Oklahoma and the remaining programs in the Big 12 going forward?
To me, that's the most fascinating aspect of all this, because you had Bob Bowlesby, and I talked to several ADs within the Big 12 in the last week who said these, Oklahoma and Texas, they sat in on all these meetings with us, didn't say a peep, and they feel like they've been gutted. So one of the ADs talked specifically about feeling a sense of betrayal. So you take that going forward. I mean, a source told me that a high-ranking UT source had reached out to one of the ADs late last Wednesday night. And this was as the story had blown up about 24 hours earlier, and said, look, it's all being blown out of proportion. It's all taken out of context. You basically have nothing to worry about. And the AD told me, okay. And then 24 hours later, he got a sinking feeling. And then within 36 hours from that late Wednesday night call he got, he and others had realized they're going to send a letter on Monday, which outlined the stuff that you updated with. All that stuff has happened. So I think that kind of feeling of betrayal, there's a lot of money that needs to be figured out, whether there's going to be exit fees are going to be paid. I don't know how they go too far along. The tricky part with this is with a lot of the scheduling things and stuff that would need to get sorted out on the SEC side for when these 2 new programs were to get in there, which we think is going to happen. It's not something that's going to happen right away. That may take a couple of years before that gets sorted out. So it's going to be a really turbulent, really rocky couple of years, I think, for the Big 12 and the teams that are in it right now.
Yeah, the conversation right now is about the SEC and the Big 12. But Bruce, you and I have been around this game long enough. We know that there's going to be a trickle-down effect that's going to, have major implications with the ACC, Big 10, and Pac-12, the remaining big conferences out there. How do you see things sorting out from their perspectives?
I think a lot of people here who are the power brokers in the other conferences, you got to remember, George Kliavkoff, he is the new, and I mean brand new Pac-12 commissioner. He just got on the job. I had a conversation with him on Tuesday of this week about how they assess and what they value from these other teams. Remember, you can talk about the TV dollars for the Big 12, but a lot of that is driven by Texas and Oklahoma. And so when you talk to people around the sport, especially some of these other commissioners, they're going to look at it this way, that in their eyes, and quite honestly, as you mentioned, we're a TV partner in this as well, to a lot of TV executives, they may see the Oklahoma States and the Texas Techs closer to Tulsa than they do to Texas in terms of just driving eyeballs. And so if you're going to add those, even think of adding those programs to your footprint, now you're splitting the pie. Maybe if you're adding that's two more people, you have to divide it up. If you're adding 4 or 6 or 8, that's tricky math. And so I think if you're the Big Ten, you're sitting there going, okay, we do have a power base here. We do have a lot of cash at our disposal. We have a lot of attractive properties here. Is there some other aspect of the rest of Power 5 college football that we could try to pluck away that gives us better positioning, whether that's coming from the ACC, perhaps, if that was something you could do, or if it was coming certainly from a USC, do you try to make something like that happen? So I think everything is on the table right now, but it's such an unstable time. Keep in mind, you also have the college football playoff expansion that was advanced forward, but while it was advanced forward, it was in this mini working group where Bob Bowlesby, the commissioner of the Big 12, and Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, were working together. And now if you're Bob Bowlesby, you're like, this guy was doing all this stuff behind my back to gut my conference. There's a lot of people who have bruised egos and a lot of feeling of betrayal that is at the root of this.
And this story, as you know, is far, far from done. Bruce, as always, thank you. And yes, there's a reason the SEC was so aggressive in wooing the Texas and Oklahomas and vice versa, because Texas and Oklahoma really have been the Big 12. You take a look at the Big 12 championship game appearances since 99, 16, all 16 included either Oklahoma or Texas. 13 of them won by either Oklahoma or Texas. They were the Big 2 in the Big 12. All right, let's carry on this conversation about Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12 and heading to the SEC. Former Oklahoma head coach Bob Stoops, USC former QB Heisman winner Matt Leinart, Colorado Buffalo Joel Klatt joining the conversation right now. Coach, obviously this situation is closer to you than the rest of the guys, so we'll start with you. Why was this move a good thing? And we're just going to say for Oklahoma. Why was this good for Oklahoma?
By far and away, far greater financial opportunities. There's no question about it. That drives everything. It always will. And at the end of the day, far greater financial opportunities, greater exposure, playing in larger stadiums and attractive games for our fans. I think it's going to really boost our recruiting on top of it. So many things added up. And the bottom line, when it gets down to it, for the last decade, and say 2 decades, there's been opportunities that have presented themselves to Oklahoma, where Oklahoma State was also an option and was part of traveling with us to wherever it might be. In particular, 10 years ago when this all happened. That opportunity isn't there this time. And if Oklahoma doesn't, move forward with this, what happens if 2 months or a year from now, Clemson and Florida State take those 2 spots? Now, where are we going to go? So in the end, this fit us. We fit in the SEC. It fits with Texas and us. So this was the right time and the right opportunity. And there were no other options when it comes to another school traveling with us.
Klatter, in regards to this move, is this ultimately, though, a good thing for college football as a whole?
I think where we're headed in college athletics in terms of NIL, and I know that the schools aren't directly involved with NIL, but also what came down in the Supreme Court decision with the Alston case, I think moves forward that ball in terms of revenue and where are these schools going to generate greater and greater revenue. And the chips laid bare on the table, this is what it is that Texas and Oklahoma were having to drag along the other 8 schools in the Big 12 from a revenue standpoint. I think we all know that. I think they would even admit that. It's not a knock on them, certainly. They've been competitive to a certain extent, each of them in their own right. But the fact remains is that the bell cows are Oklahoma and Texas. And in order to grow that revenue pie, they needed to look elsewhere. So they did. Now, is this going to be the right decision or move? I think it remains to be seen on other fronts, because yes, financial is a huge lens through which to view this, but there's also the competitive standpoint. And I would just throw up a bit of caution. And by the way, Texas has been basically non-existent in the last decade. This conference has been run by Oklahoma. All those Big 12 championship game appearances and titles, that's basically just Oklahoma, 95% Oklahoma, and Texas has been, as we all know, really a non-factor since 2009, really, late in the early 2000s. But I would say that from a competitive standpoint, Oklahoma has hung their hat on the fact that they are going to win conference championships, compete to get into that playoff. Well, that may not be afforded them in the new conference from a competitive standpoint. They may be able to recruit better, but from a competitive standpoint, I think it's be careful what you wish for to a certain extent, although we'll see what the makeup is with 4 pods of 4, how that all shakes out. And ultimately, the last thing, and I know I'm long-winded, but this is all going to be viewed through the lens, guys, and Matt, more specifically to you, of where the playoff goes. Because if the playoff doesn't expand in a giant way, now you're going to a place where there's going to be a lot of really big brands at the table competing for a few spots in the college postseason. And that's not a position that any of them want to be in, which is why, to Bruce's point, Greg Sankey, everyone is a little bit frustrated with him, to say the least, because the disingenuous nature of expanding to 12, being on that working group, all the while having these back pocket conversations with Oklahoma and Texas.
Yeah, I agree. I think the expansion, obviously, with Oklahoma and Texas, in particular Oklahoma, because they've been a playoff team, would clearly help them. And I know, obviously, Greg Sankey knows that. I think, to go back to what Coach said, the money grab, the exposure, I think the excitement this creates for the fan base of Norman, for teams in the SEC to come to Norman, Oklahoma to play football there in that great stadium. The bigger picture of that seems exciting, but I do tend to agree with Joel. The first thing I thought of when this was announced was, wow, that's a much more difficult road to get to a college football playoff. If that's the ultimate goal for a team like Oklahoma, which it should be, than it is in the Big 12. And I understand probably the frustration, Coach, of teams like Oklahoma and Texas really being the flag bearers of this conference in the past. But again, when you're facing a schedule like that, as we know, week in and week out, and the playoff per se doesn't expand to the 12 teams, it's a much more difficult road to get to a college football playoff. So, there's a lot of kind of tentacles to this thing, which I think all of us are just every single day, Rob, as you talk about with Bruce, just every day new news comes out, and how this is going to affect every other conference is fascinating to me. But, this is just the first domino, with a bunch of dominoes falling in the next probably couple months.
And Rob, real quick, I wanted to ask Coach, how much of this do you think was the fact that OU and Texas it's vital that they run the state of Texas in recruiting? And over the last 4 and 5 years, to see A&M rise up because of that flag of the SEC and start really competing at the highest level in recruiting in the state of Texas, how much of that do you think drove this decision for OU and Texas to kind of stake their claim as the foundational programs in recruiting in that state?
Well, I think before that, it's ensuring 100% that you're going to sell your stadium out. 85,000 in Texas is around 100,000. Protecting that fan base, giving them the games they want. The financial benefit, I'd imagine, will go from 6 home games now to 7. And then we have the neutral game with Texas, I'm assuming, still in the Cotton Bowl. But, listen, for sure, Lincoln and I talked about this ahead of it happening. And my feeling to him was, look, I really believe we've gone to 4 playoffs. Obviously, in some cases, a couple of games we didn't fare well. But at the end of the day, several of those games we were in tight competition, and I believe 4 or 5 more recruits, in particular, maybe on the defensive side of the ball, and that could change.
Yeah.
So this may put us over the hump as opposed to bringing us back. We know it's not a cakewalk. Come on, we're aware of the quality of play in the SEC, but obviously, you know, I know since 2000 we're 25-9 against current SEC football teams. So we're no slouch either.
Yeah.
Macro is, how does this impact college football? Joel Klatt, is this a good thing for the broad picture of college football?
Boy, I think that's tough. You know, I think, Rob, I thought about this a lot, and I have thought about this a ton. And I feel like there are very compelling arguments on both sides of this, right? You can answer no really quickly. You can answer yes very quickly. I think that the people that would be answering no, this is not good for the sport, would probably be answering in somewhat of twofold. One, a nostalgic mind frame, because they understand the uniqueness of college football, in particular the fabric with which the fan bases and the programs interact, the pageantry of the sport, and they want to maintain that across a larger scope of college football, right?
The thing that makes college football so beautiful, right?
That's right. That's right. You know,
the
that
fan is not involved in this equation and this solution and these decisions at all. And I think that's a frustrating element.
That's right. So while, you know, you can argue the fans in Norman or in Austin might benefit from this, right, and see some different brands, well, the fan bases in Ames and in Lubbock and in Fort Worth, you know, they're going to get hurt by this. So overall, you know, I think it can detract from college football in a global sense. Now, having said that, I think that if you're forward looking and you're looking at what's on the horizon, and more specifically, I'll go back to it, guys, the Alston case with the Supreme Court, there is going to be an immense amount of financial pressure on institutions, not because of NIL, but because of the Alston case. And what that means as far as not being able to limit, and being able to is probably wrong, but not limiting education-related benefits. Judge Kavanaugh's consent on that was an evisceration of the model. And so if you're looking forward, I think that, you know, Rob, you see a case that can be made that these big brands that are going to want to continue to play college football at the highest level are going to have to make decisions that affect the bottom line as far as revenue goes. Now, will it hurt the nostalgia of the sport? Yes. Will it move the sport forward? Probably.
Well, I just tell you too, you talk about protecting, you know, the financial part, that's what Oklahoma is doing. If someone could guarantee us and Texas that we'll get a conference TV network. We're the only conference that doesn't have one. And after 2025, you can guarantee a certain amount of money for dollars for a TV contract. And again, we don't have our own conference network that everyone else does. So, and you're talking about one of the top 10 college football brands in the history of college football. And all of a sudden, who knows, in 2-3 years, all of a sudden we're left out sitting there holding the bag. You know, that all of a sudden everyone else has made these moves. What are we doing? You know, so if you look at, you know, the quality and the historic following and traditions of Texas and Oklahoma, we need to protect those interests.
Matt, the West Coast lens, how do they view this? And obviously USC, you know, so much going on with them behind the scenes as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the bigger question that I was saying, and what Bruce was talking about was just the domino and the ripple effect that's going to affect all the other conferences. Clearly, the Big Ten is a massive conference, and you know, what is the Big Ten going to do? And then you go to the West Coast and you talk about the Pac-12. You talk about schools like USC and UCLA and LA and up north in Washington and Oregon. You know, is this a time where maybe some of these schools say, hey, you know, maybe we branch out and maybe we go independent, or maybe we talk to the Big Ten. These are all conversations that I'm sure are being had behind closed doors. But I just think that's what this decision, this massive decision, I called it an earth-shattering decision in college football with Oklahoma and Texas, is going to affect dozens and dozens and dozens of teams all across the country, in particular some of these from the big Power 5 conferences. So I'm really interested in seeing kind of what that next big move is. Is it teams reaching out to the Big Ten? Is it a team like USC potentially, where I know Joel and I have kind of talked about this, is, hey, maybe they go independent, and connect with a big TV network. I don't know what's going to happen, but just to go back to Joel's point, I'm kind of a purist, and I really love college football for what it was. I think the NIL, which I am in favor of, was the first big kind of people take a step back, and there's people on the line of it's great because college athletes should get paid, and there's others where now they're professionals and all the ripple effect it's going to have, and we're waiting to see on that. And now this big move with realignment and kind of taken away from the tradition of some of these programs, the rivalries, the regional rivalries, the fan bases being left out. All of those things kind of make it feel a little indifferent about it. But to Coach's point, I do understand the financial gain and the exposure that's going to be had for these football teams. But Rob, I'm telling you, there's going to be so many big things coming up that are going to take us by surprise. And I'm just, it could be today, it could be tomorrow.
So
this is so far from over, Rob.
Yeah.
Like this is a seismic shift, right? I mean, as you were talking with Bruce,
we speculate all we want. We have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah. Right, but right now, and Joel, I asked you the question, you didn't answer it. Is this a thing for college football?
Overall, globally,
for Joel Klatt.
No, not globally for the sport. But that's been part of the problem with the sport for a long time, is that we have not had a unified governing body. And you got to put the NCAA outside of this because they're just they're not strong enough to do this. But college football has operated in silos for so long. So you can't fault Greg Sankey for what he's been doing, right? He works for those university presidents. You can't fault Oklahoma and Texas for what they're doing, because they're working for their own, if you call it, constituents. But there's no one working for the constituency of college football. This is why I've argued for a long time, for years, guys. I've made this argument that we need a constitutional convention of college football, right? We are the 13 colonies before we had a federal government in the United States of America. And before we had that republic, right? Like those men went in Philadelphia and Independence Hall, and they gave us a constitution. We need an overarching governing umbrella over the sport, because no one's working for the whole right now.
Hey, Joel, even that constitution's being challenged right now.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Everything is fluid at this point in our world.
Coach, if they came to you and said, we need a college football czar, we need a college football commissioner, is that something that you would vote in favor of?
I would. I really would. And I got the perfect guy. Barry Alvarez ought to be the guy. But I think it would be really good.
Maddie?
Yeah, I think the guy is in the box right next to me. Not that our very own Joel Klatt is he hasn't ruffled any feathers throughout other
No.
Which guy? Yeah. This guy, or that guy?
No,
other one. Coach, don't want no part of that. Let me enjoy my retirement.
Yeah, that's right.
I feel like we're the Brady Bunch. Right.
This is a bad Brady Bunch episode. The other things that worry me, and we all know, that college football generates the income for every single sport in those universities, right?
Yep.
And to me, having played soccer, which doesn't generate money, I worry about those other programs, particularly at those other schools, and the impact on them and the scholarship reduction that is going to be breathing down departments next that are already strapped for cash. That concerns me, because it's student athletes. It's not just football players. It's all of the student athletes. But I understand football is the one that runs the show. The other part is, hey, if you're in the SEC and you're Vanderbilt or you're Missouri, I think at some point you're saying, why do they still need me when they keep getting these guys and we're kind of holding things down a little bit? Man, the scheduling, the money, the contracts are going to be broken. Can we just talk football on the field? Can we do that?
Yes, that would be amazing.
Right? All right, so let's do it. And let's start with the conference we've been talking about already, the SEC. You're defending national champs. You're defending SEC champs. Look, the SEC has had at least one of their teams in the last 6 national championship games. They've won 11 of the last 15 national championships. But there's some serious turnover going on with a lot of these programs. Florida only returning 10 starters. Yeah. Alabama lost so many skill guys. Joel Klatt, is Alabama still the team to beat in the SEC? I need an answer first, and then you can tell me why.
Yes.
All right.
And it's because we've seen Nick do this before. Now, maybe not to this extent as far as replacing guys that can go out there and win a national championship, but we've seen him, Rob, win with different players, cycles and cycles of recruits. We've seen him win with different styles, scoring a lot of points and being the best offense statistically in college football history last year to some respect. We've seen him win with defense when that was in vogue. So to be foolish, it would be foolish to sit here and think to yourself, well, now that these players are gone, Nick's going to lose his luster, or he lost a coordinator and it's going to – no. Alabama is the favorite, and they should be the favorite. Okay, now, having said that, the cautionary tale would be, look at what LSU lost from a couple of years ago, and now you're looking at what Alabama lost offensively, and you start to say, are they going to be able to keep up with what they were able to do on the field last year versus what LSU went from averaging 48 points under Joe Brady and Joe Burrow to averaging 32 points. You got to stay up there, right? So if you're going to be a great offense, you still got to be a great offense. But I will tell you, they will be able to reload. No one's recruited better than Alabama. They had the top recruiting class in the history of recruiting rankings last year. And I think that they should be and will be the favorite in the SEC.
I agree. I just want to add that, this is Alabama, and it's we always compare Saban and Belichick and the way the Patriots won all those Super Bowls. Some were with great defenses, some were great passing offense, some were great rushing offense. The same here. I would say, though, that this seems to feel like the year where another team can step up and dethrone Alabama, because solely, to be honest, they lost so much on offense. And I know they reload, and I know they retool. And I'm a huge Bryce Young fan. I remember talking to Sark about Bryce last year. He went to my high school. I got a chance to get to talk to him this summer. Great kid, extremely smart, great head on the shoulders. He's going to be a superstar at some point. He just doesn't have the experience. And you go back to last year, my gosh, guys, you talk about Najee Harris, you talk about Devontae Smith, who won a Heisman, that's a generational receiver. And at least at the collegiate level, we hadn't seen a receiver like that in a long time. So you're asking a young freshman quarterback to go in with almost a completely new offense and play at that same level. I think this year's Alabama team will be led by their defense. I think their defense is going to be extremely good. But if this is the year, we might get to this in a second, but if this is the year, I think we might see another team kind of sneak up and dethrone them in the SEC.
Well, let's get to it right now, my friend. Is that program Georgia? And JT Daniels, the quarterback who stepped in late in the season and really sparked the Bulldogs.
And that's the number one reason why I have them. I agree with Joel. Alabama's the team to beat. They should be. Preseason talk and preseason rankings don't mean anything. You got to go take care of business on the football field. But we saw and we watched it every single week last week at the end of the season when JT Daniels took over. The offense just looked different. And that was no disrespect to Jake Fromm and some of these other quarterbacks that have come before. It's more of a pro-style rush offense, dink and dunk. You win with great defense. And those quarterbacks were never asked to do a whole lot. But once JT Daniels came in, I think they averaged nearly 40 points a game. He went 4-0. And you just saw the variety in which they could attack you offensively. They had tremendous skill players back on the outside, tremendous running backs back. And that guy right there, I think, is the guy that can lead them over the top. Their defense will not be an issue, as it never is really an issue. Their defense will be extremely good again. But to me, there's a lot of pressure on JT Daniels to get the job done, because I do believe this is the year that Georgia can beat Alabama and get into a college football playoff.
I agree with Matt. 2017, 2019, as odd as this sounds, the last two times Alabama did not, those are the last two times they did not defend their SEC championship after those two championships. And when you look at the roster, the only other team that's recruited close to Alabama is Georgia. I think I read they're going to start 19 five-star high school recruits. 19 of them will be starting on their football team. So they've got talent, and they've got a somewhat of an experienced quarterback coming back. So I think they've got a real chance.
I'm going to go guys, around the horn with you guys real quick to give me one other program you think can challenge Alabama or Georgia. And I want to see who votes for Texas A&M, that team that was just on the outside looking into the college football playoffs last year. Coach, are you an A&M believer that they might be able to do it, or is it another program?
I'm glad I get to go first because that's exactly what I was going to say. And Jimbo Fisher's won a national championship. His strength and conditioning coordinator was with me as a guy that's been involved with 4 different national championships. They know how to do it. They've got a great offensive line coming back and running backs to help carry that new quarterback. The quarterback's going to be an issue, but Jimbo's had a really strong history developing quarterbacks, and they've got a lot of people back on defense.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Coach. I think Texas A&M just sniffing the playoff last year, got left out obviously, and had a good bowl game. Breaking in a new quarterback is tough, especially in the SEC. But the more I think about it, LSU is an interesting one, and you can go back to last year, and they had a poor season, and that was because they lost a whole lot the year before. That might have been the greatest team we've seen in college football history, for sure, probably the greatest offense in college football history. But they returned 9 guys on both sides of the ball, and typically we always like to joke and say, well, that doesn't necessarily mean they're good players. But this is LSU, where they've recruited top 10, top 5 nationally every single year, and much like we're talking about Jimbo, Ed Ogeron, who I played for, who we all love. He breeds championship caliber locker rooms and cultures and all of those things. So, look, I don't know if LSU is going to be a 10-0 team, but that's a team just to keep an eye on in that division, especially with what we just kind of talked about with Alabama, with some holes to fill there. Texas A&M doesn't have a quarterback at this point. LSU's got a shot. They got a lot of guys coming back. I know I've talked to some people over there. They're extremely hungry. They're disappointed in the way they played last year. So that's a sleeper team to me. By no means do I think they can compete for a national championship at this point, but keep an eye on LSU in the West out there.
I will just say this: Texas A&M, I would favor them in this conversation as a team that can be a threat over LSU, just because of the lack of continuity on the LSU staff. Right. So you can say like, hey, they got 18 starters back, most in the SEC, 9 on defense. But what they're doing on the staff under Ed Ogeron is drastic. Right. So that's going to be hard. And as Coach knows, it's really difficult even to change 1 or 2 guys on your staff, much less some of those wholesale changes that LSU made. While at A&M, you feel like you have a little bit of a veteran crew. Right. And you're not going to have your quarterback be a world beater because of those elements that Coach mentioned: offensive line, running back, defense. You've got your head coach, you've got your strength coach, you've got all these things there. And it feels like it's been building towards you climbing that mountain. So that's why in this conversation, as a sleeper team, that's why I would go with A&M.
All right, let's see what the fans have to say about who they think the team to beat in the SEC is, and if there's any outsiders. Yep. All right. So Forrest is a Bama believer.
Yeah.
That's not a shocker. All right. Defense. The LSU defense. Well, if you guys remember last year, an LSU defender topped our defensive player of the year list. Can a Tiger be on top again this year? All right, let's get to our top 5 defensive player list. 2 from the SEC at the top and the bottom of our top 5. And let's start at number 5. And we are going to Alabama. And Will Anderson Jr. led FBS with 60 pressures last season. That as a true freshman. Number 4, Brady Quinn's voice has been heard on the show. Kyle Hamilton, the All-American last year with over 60 tackles, 6 pass breakups, 4.5 tackles for loss, and 1 interception. Your guy, Coach Nick Benito, you're going to talk more about him. The Oklahoma linebacker coming in at number 3, highest pressure rate in college football last season. Number 2, let's go to Oregon. Kayvon Thibodeau, 12 sacks last season, 23.5 tackles for loss. This guy just changes games in and out. And Derek Stingley, welcome back to the top of the list, my friend. 2 years in a row, Mr. Stingley, according to our esteemed panel of experts, is going to be the top defensive player in the nation. So, Matt, let's start at number one. Why is this quarterback back on top of our list?
Well, listen, as an ex-retired quarterback, the worst thing, besides seeing guys like Kayvon Thibodeau, we're going out and looking on the outside and seeing those defensive backs that you knew were going to be on an island one-on-one, and you knew you always attacked them, but you better put the ball where it needed to be, or you better have had a great receiver out there. He's just a tremendous player. I mean, you can talk about the ball skills are tremendous, the speed, the size, the athleticism. He's one of those rare guys. He's going to be a future top 5, top 10 pick in the NFL draft. He'll go up against all the top players in the SEC. And I've talked to Coach Orgeron about him. He has that dog mentality. He is just a heck of a football player, and he's been doing it at a high level in the top conference in college football in the SEC. So he's one of those guys that allows you to do so much for your defense because he can take away a half a field. He can lock down the opponent's best offense, which then allows the defensive line to play, the linebackers to play. So he's that type of player that can affect the whole defense and what you want to do. He's very special player.
Yeah, Matty, I totally agree with you. I think that this guy, he's been the best corner in college football since about halfway through his true freshman year. And it's because of his versatility, right? Yep. He's got a great feel for space. So he's not just a man cover guy, but he's probably the best man cover guy out there. He also has a great feel for space. He's got a great ability to make plays on the ball. And he also will come up and defend in the run. And he's not afraid to stick his face in there and make tackles. So this guy is a special player, like you said, about everything that Coach O talked about. There's no doubt about it. And I'll go a step further. He and Thibodeau will absolutely be, at least in my estimation, the top 2 picks in the NFL draft that are not quarterbacks next year. I think that they have separated themselves out.
Yep. A guy like Thibodeau's coming at you, Joel Klatt. What are you doing?
Well, I wasn't very smart, Rob, so I would just hang in there with my chin up and try to throw it, which is why I had 10 concussions, right?
Joel would try to run him over.
Oh, my gosh. I wasn't the smartest guy.
That's why you're doing television right now. Coach,
100%.
In Oklahoma, the linebacker, Benito, what is it about his game that you like so much?
Well, he has a massively quick first step. That's where he really takes advantage of everybody. 6'3", 230. Talking to his coaches, I think what's really going to show up this year is commitment in the weight room and in his training. In the early years, he's just doing what he's told to do. From what I understand this year, he's all in. He understands the benefits of it. And, he's just he's a lot stronger and even quicker if that's possible. So, and with added experience, I think he's going to show up even more. I think 49 pressures last year. He had 8 sacks, 10 tackles for loss. Really a disruptor.
Yep.
Maddie, I want to go to somebody that did not finish on our top 5 list, and apparently you are becoming a Texas A&M homer over here. There's a lot to like with those Aggies.
Yeah, DeMarvin Leal is a tremendous player. People forget last year they had arguably the best defense in the SEC statistically, and people just kind of forgot, and they got left out of the college football playoff. But if you look at this kid, it doesn't have quite the exposure that Thibodeau. Obviously, Thibodeau came in as the #1 player in the country out of high school. But DeMarvin, it shows up on film, and Coach just talked about just a disruptor. That's what he is. You can talk about the sack cost fumbles, the pressures, the hurries, the tackles for loss, all of those things. He's big, 6'4", 280, 290, but extreme athleticism and a high motor at that. And you watch some of these highlights. I mean, look at the big fella run. I think this is a year where he can really jump on the scene, because Texas A&M put themselves as a team really on the map last year, as Coach talked about, and they're a sleeper team this year. They will be led by their defense. They have a tremendous running back, but they will be led by this defensive end, DeMarvin Leal, who is a tremendous football player. He'll rise up the draft boards this year, and he should have a big impact on this Aggies football team.
Matty, I think he's having an identity crisis. He's got the spat. He's got the single digit. He thinks he's 230, but he's 290.
Listen, I like the single digit. I spatted in high school. I think we got to get rid of the spat. The spat's no good. But hey, look good, play good, Joel. We know that, man.
That's right.
The single digit always makes you look faster and thinner.
It does.
That's right.
Thinner for sure.
Coach Mike Rose, the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year last year. Why is he so high on your list?
Yeah, Mike Rose from Iowa State, great football player. 6'4", 250 for a linebacker. Big, great range. He's got 5 interceptions. The only player in the country, 95 plus tackles and 5 interceptions. So very big, good athlete. Does a great job blitzing, obviously, with all the pressures and sacks. And you're not even counting batted balls. So this guy's a real player on a really good defense.
The fans out there agree with your assessment of Mike Rose, and they have made their point known. Well, that's a lot of ats, by the way. And there it is, Mike Rose all day and twice on Saturdays.
Yeah, Mike's a great player. Honestly, he's first team All-American player. Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year and 5 picks. You got to give it to him.
I love the Cyclone Nation chiming in here. I didn't even know there was a storm cloud emoji that was available. Maybe I just have an old phone or something like that. All right, so we covered a lot this week, and I guess we're going to do it again next week, if that's good with you all and your summer plans. We talked about the SEC this week. Next week, our good friends in the Big Ten go under the microscope, and we're going to talk about the top 5 impact transfers out there. Man, that transfer portal, whether you're a program or a player, has been awfully busy this summer. So we'll see you next week again. Big Noon Kickoff, the off season. We'll see you next week.